Good evening, everyone. Usually we have water, just regular old water. Tonight, courtesy of Brooklyn Seltzer Boys, we have the authentic, really heavy article, Seltzer. I'm going to ask you for a little help because I don't know how to actually. I don't think I've ever operated one. I've seen them in antique stores. And been like, is there anything in here? But I don't think I've ever actually.
Me neither.
You neither? Well, why don't you see if you have beginner's luck in there?
That's it.
Well, that's how it's done. All right. Don't get electrocuted. Okay, I'm going to try. Do this evening. I did that on purpose.
Is this a test?
All right. Don't. I'm going to put it on the. Thank you very much. It's all downhill from here. Just want you to know. First of all, thank you for coming, period. Also, it's been a very hard week, but it's a joy to be in the temple with all of you in light of current events. And Pittsburgh actually plays a very special role in Barry's book. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm very eager to let him tell you a little bit about that. First of all, at the very end is Alex Gomber. He is our Seltzer model. He's also the owner of Brooklyn Seltzer Works. He's from the venerable Gomber family, the owner of Gomber Seltzer Works. Sorry, Brooklyn Seltzer Boys. And he is the current generation of seltzer delivery men. Maybe seltzer delivery people. I don't know, you'll tell me if they're
Seltzer men.
Seltzer men.
And women.
And women, right.
Fourth generation, by the way.
And he's fourth generation from Brooklyn. So welcome, Alex, to the stage. And Adina Sussman. Adina Sussman is a very accomplished food writer, cookbook author. She's visiting us from Tel Aviv, which is her new full-time home. She is a New Yorker as well and is currently a columnist at Hadassah magazine. We have multiple books coming out, including Sababa, which is coming out in the summertime. It's all about market cooking in Tel Aviv. And she has, most relevant to this conversation, a book in the works about gazos, which is a very particular type of Israeli seltzer-based drink. So she's going to be telling us a bit about the unique story of seltzer in Israel. Please welcome Adina Sussman. And Barry Joseph is, I think, the only world expert on seltzer alive. He is the infamous author of the brand new Seltzertopia that really tells you everything you need to know about seltzer in such a personable way. I really enjoyed the book so much. So please welcome Larry Joseph. He's signing books at the end of the night as well. And just because it's all in our minds, and then we'll continue to go into my minutiae of seltzer, which is just, I don't know, insert bubbly pun here, effervescent, delightful story. But you kick off your book with a story of a Pittsburgh seltzer company, and with very deep roots in Squirrel Hill. And it's a lovely story, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about it.
Sure, thanks, Gabrielle, and thank you all for coming out tonight. This is tremendously exciting. So, yes, indeed, Seltzertopia, which is a nonfiction book, but reads like fiction, actually follows the tale of two Pittsburgh-based advertising executives who decided almost on a whim to buy a 120-year-old Seltzer Works and bring it back to life. And yes, one of the men is Jewish, he's in the book, his rabbi's in the book, and I contacted them after the awful attack, and thank God they're well, but of course we were with them in the morning for their community. But this book captures that time, about 10 years ago, when they were trying to figure out who is our audience? Who's going to buy our seltzer? And yes, they inherited a company that was based in Squirrel Hill and the other Jewish communities around Pittsburgh, but then expanded it out, as we've seen what I call Seltzertopia, this explosion of interest in seltzer, not just in Pittsburgh, but all around the country. And through the book, you learn about what does it mean to run a seltzer works. How do you do what Alex has been doing, what his dad and granddad and great-grandfather as well? Great-father as well have been doing in Brooklyn for multiple generations, not just 60 years ago, but today here in Brooklyn and in Pittsburgh.
So can you tell us, for starters, where the name seltzer comes from, the word?
Great question. So seltzer is one of those food products that is based on the name of a location. Niederseltzers, a town in Germany, was one of many spas hundreds of years ago that people would go to who wanted to take the waters. You know, get out of the city, get out of the pollution, go to a place where you could bathe in bubbling mineral water, maybe drink the waters, and you'd be somehow healthier. Maybe you were just healthier because you left the city. Maybe it's the water itself. And like many of these spas, they bottled their waters. And as their bottles traveled around Europe and traveled around the world, Niederseltzers got shortened to Seltzers, which then became Seltzer. And that's where seltzer comes from.
And the claims that it has some kind of a health benefit?
Some kind. Any kind. Anything you can think of, someone said seltzer could take care of. Put up your hand if you think seltzer does something healthy for you. There we go. I bet you'd all say something different.
I'm just curious, panelists, Alex and Adina, do you have any feelings about whether seltzer does a body good?
I do. I mean, I sort of think of it as like the Jewish digestif. Like, it sort of, after you eat something rich or heavy, it kind of cuts through the schmaltz or the gribbiness or whatever it is you're eating, and kind of helps you move on to the next course, obviously. But to me, it's always been like a bit of a stomach settler, and that's how I view it, like its premier health benefit. Yeah.
How about you, Alex?
I mean, seltzer's healthy for me. It's the way I make a living. But of course it's healthy. It's just as good, or if not better than water. I mean, we need water to survive. We need water to hydrate. It's all my dad drinks. Hi, Dad. You know, it's a very healthy drink, and it's just plain. And the way we make our seltzer, it's just water and CO2. We don't put any additives or flavoring or anything in the water. It's just triple filtered water and CO2. And there's doctors that say it ruins your enamel, and that's hooey. That's not true at all. It's just a very healthy, plain drink.
I've even read today on the New York Magazine website that if you wash your face with fizzy waters, it's good for you, and this is something that is a trend in Korea and Japan, and it's coming here to the US, so.
If it's good enough for the matzo ball, it's good enough for your
Good for business.
Yeah, that's the latest trend. You know, I get an email every day that shows any article that has anything to do with seltzer. So I get to watch all the trends come and go. That trend started about a month ago. Fashion and cosmetic magazines talking about you should bathe yourself with seltzer.
Well, it's good news for Alex, for sure. So let's backtrack to these machines and these bottles and the fact that you can't make more of these, right? Once you got what you got, like in your story, Barry, about the fellows who bought the Seltzer Works in Pittsburgh, they had their finite amount of bottles and that was it. So Alex, can you tell us a little bit about the machinery you use and how old these bottles are and anything you know about how these ancient machines actually still work?
Sure. So most of these bottles and the collection of bottles that we have were mostly made in Czechoslovakia. They're actually hand-blown glass from Czechoslovakia. And you can see at the bottom of a bottle, it says, that's pretty clear, it says made in Czechoslovakia. I don't know if you can make that out. But some of the bottles are made in Czechoslovakia, some are made in America. You can tell that they have a seam running down. Those were made in a mold. But the bottles are very, very old. And the history about the bottles is incredible because there were so many seltzermen back in its heyday. Many, many seltzermen, all over the place. That's what you had back in the day. Similar to getting the milk delivery, you got seltzer delivery. So the seltzermen came, they brought, these bottles, and some of them could have been from when my great-grandfather was in business, and they all are etched with different logos. So this one says Liberty Beverage Company, and they're all different. So when we deliver bottles today, you get a case of 10 bottles with all different logos, and sometimes the heads say a different name on the head. Sometimes the year is on there, so they're all very old.
Whose names are on the head? Like what type of people end up with their names on the head?
Yeah, what is that? I've always wondered what the names mean.
Well, the names are the names of the Seltzer men. So you know, what I think and what I've been told by the other Seltzer men, I'm 31 years old, so I wasn't there. You know, the bottles needed to be repaired, so some Seltzer men put a different head on the bottle because one of the heads was broken. So there's two pieces of history. There's this Seltzer man and this Seltzer man. So there's a lot of history just in the bottle itself.
So one of the characters in your book, Barry, is a collector of seltzer bottles.
Richie.
He's from Long Island,
Yes.
right?
Cool. Moved out west. Yeah, I started out here.
We have a clip. I'm not sure if I can go out of order with our clips, but we have a clip of Richie showing off some of his amazing collection. It almost reads like a mockumentary, but it's quite delightful.
Demonstrate some of the history of seltzer bottles. Oh, by the way, they're also called siphons in Europe, or siphon. This might have been called a siphon. The earliest example of a glass seltzer bottle, or actually any seltzer bottle, 1860s here. The shape is called an ovoid, kind of like a football. But better be careful, I only ever found one of these. These are actually called send-ups. They were used in hotels for room service. They would send them up to your room, so they got the nickname send up. Over in Europe, I think they call them demis, or little like half pints. This shape over here is called a marquee. Some people nickname this the Aunt Jemima or the Mae West bottle because it's very shapely, starting off round and tapering to a pyramid shape to the bottom. These are just some of my favorite bottles. Seltzer bottles come in all different sizes. Here's a large one of the biggest ones I have. Here's a tiny little charm seltzer bottle. I think I got a nice small one in one of my pockets here too. Yeah, we got this little guy here. This was a little novelty item, like a salesman's sample.
Does anyone on the stage have a small seltzer bottle?
I actually do. I have a little seltzer right here. Now it says on it 12 ounces, but that's good for a dollhouse.
I have a question. Would another reason be that they put the names because the bottles were valuable?
The names on the seltzer bottles?
Like the actual owner of the bottle. Like, because when I got seltzer delivered in the 2000s, I felt like I had to go through like a character investigation before they would agree to deliver seltzer to me for the first time, because people steal and collect the bottles, and now they're very valuable. But at the time, were they just a dime a dozen, and they weren't as valuable? Because I would imagine that would be a way that they could identify that it belonged to their company.
Well, all of the seltzermen wanted to identify their bottles because what was happening was in a building where many seltzermen are coming to, people would sneak around and swap bottles.
Right.
So they would all have their names printed on them. So, you know, like we talked about, this is the Bear, New York. This guy had all bottles with his logo on it, and all of his customers got this specific bottle. Obviously, generations later, a seltzerman would go out of business and sell his route to this person who passed away and gave his bottles to his widow, who sold it off to some other guy, and the bottles kind of got all mishmash. Now we're sitting here 100 years later, and we're it. So we have an assortment of bottles that have just been trickled down. So when we get a phone call from somebody who has bottles in their basement, they're all different. You know, they're all different bottles, and we go running to somebody who has bottles.
So how many seltzer men are working that you guys know of right now in the United States?
In the book, we have Alex here in New York. We also have Walter Backerman, seltzer man extraordinaire. He was yours? You had Walter. You're very lucky. He's still out there. He's incredible. Anyone else in New York, Alex? I'll talk about the rest of the country.
There's two more that are in New York that are not full-time, but
on the tail end.
Yeah.
And many of the ones who were operating a few years ago sold to Alex or Walter as they went out of business, so people could keep getting them. We have a gentleman down in Florida. We have the folks in Pittsburgh who are in the book. We have Catherine Renz in San Francisco, the Seltzer Sisters. She's just one person. She got it from the sisters, someone called the sisters. We have a gentleman from Argentina in Southern California, and that might be it.
So we have this amazing nostalgia for seltzer, this kind of seltzer. And also, can you guys show the Three Stooges clip, please?
Top, must have refreshment. Thank you. Now listen, please. What's the matter with you? Give me that. You got it. I'd like to see you do that again. Dennis, why you? Give me that. So you're right.
So there's that seltzer. And then there is, LaCroix. And between LaCroix and the Three Stooges, Seltzer Works Seltzer, there were all kinds of, the Perriers of the world. And Barry, can you tell us a little bit about how seltzer has evolved to become such a hot drink right now?
So when I started writing the book 14 years ago, it was seen as, this side project that no one was going to be interested in. People didn't predict that we were going to have this explosion of interest in seltzer. But actually, interest in seltzer has been rising not just in the last few years, but as I document in the book, since the 70s. Seltzer's had two peaks. The one peak was just after the turn of the century, 1910, 1920, and then interest started waning and going down decade after decade after decade. Article after article was writing about the last seltzer man. It was going to be done. But then something happened in the 70s that came to America from France. Anyone want to guess what it is? Perrier, that's right. Perrier came over, introduced a number of things. Bubbling water became chic. It was something that was being drunk by the folks who were called yuppies at the time, who were setting a new standard of what was cool. People started saying, wait a second, some of us were saying, we have something like this already, it's seltzer. And so seltzer started having a resurgence. Going into the 80s, we started seeing something new, which was flavored seltzer. And I read about the history of that in the book as well. Original New York seltzer, which was actually from LA. And that began a line of flavored seltzer, which some people say, hey, that's not seltzer. If you add flavor, it's not real, that's soda. Other people say they would never drink it without the flavors in it. Whatever you think, it's part of the seltzer lineage. And over the last 15, 20 years, we started to notice that more and more different populations, different groups around the country were interested in seltzer for different reasons. People were interested for health, and the health crazes of jogging in the 70s, and people wanted to take care of the earth and think about their relationship with the people who were selling them their food and understanding where it was coming from. You could have water sent over from Fiji, or you can get triple filtered water from your tap that's better than the water coming from Fiji. I bet Alex would argue, and I probably agree with him. And so what we've seen in the last 30 years is this return of interest in seltzer that I think is more popular now than ever throughout history, because more populations identify with it. You have a whole generation of millennials. I don't know if there's any millennials here who are often said that's the drink of their generation, and it's the Croix that's doing it, not what's in this bottle, but they're all seltzer.
Fabulous. And Adina, I feel that what you have shared with me, which was fascinating, is that there's a similar kind of back to the land seltzer connection happening in Israel that you definitely tapped into with the book that you're working on, and seltzer plays a very interesting role in the original food of the young country of Israel. I'd love for you to tell us more about that.
Yeah, so how many of you have been to Israel? So some of you might have seen on Rothschild Boulevard, there's the first kiosk. So in 1910, when the new city was built, called Ahuzat Bayit, which was sort of right near where Neve Tzedek is now, they put a little kiosk where they sold all kinds of delicacies, and one of the things that made it sort of prestigious and a nice place to go was that they sold seltzer on tap and gazos. And gazos comes from the word gas, is gaz in Hebrew, and it's like a fizzy drink that has some sort of a sweetener added to it. And in olden times, it was sort of an artificially colored or sweetened syrup, but it definitely has made its way into Israeli literature. I brought a couple of little readings that I could read to you from famous Israelis that I was doing some research. So Chaim Nachman Bialik, who eventually became sort of like the poet laureate of Israel. He was a Chovevei Tzion, a lover of Zion, and he wrote a little ditty about Seltzer. I'll say it in Hebrew and sort of trying to explain the slang. He said, "Gazazini ve'egrashech ha'adafini mi milech," which means like gas me or give me a seltzer with your grush or your small amount of money, and ha'adafini mi milech, and you can give me the change with your words instead of money. So he's sort of like tapping into this idea that like this is like a drink that people sit around and converse around together. And I mean, I was actually thinking as we were walking in that seltzer is so Jewish because it's actually the only drink that kind of talks to you with its bubbles, like as it's kind of sitting there. It's just making noise, like sitting there next to you. And then Yizhar Smolanski, who went by the name S. Yizhar to distinguish himself from other famous Smolanski writers in Israel, he wrote something more about the sweetened drinks called gazoz, and he said, and thanks to my husband in Israel who helped me translate this beautifully into English, and the man in the apron takes the tall, bright glass in his hand, and in that hand takes the bottle of magic, and pours into the glass a measure of red juice, or green or yellow. And when the right amount is reached, he turns the glass to the shining spigot, and into it gushes a torrent of gazoz. And he would raise and lower the glass towards the spigot as if showing off the secrets of his magic. And with the flourish of an artist, he sets the full glass on a marble countertop, and gives it the slightest push towards the astonished and enchanted customer, who is speechless and even forgets to rummage in his pocket for the half coin.
So the Romantics wrote about opium, and the Israeli poets wrote about seltzer.
Yes. So bringing it into the modern times, like in the United States, seltzer went through like its period of popularity in the 50s and 60s. There are also a lot of German and Eastern European people living in Israel in the early time of the state, and they loved seltzer. And then it fell sort of into obscurity until about 10 years ago. You started seeing restaurants like Miznon in Tel Aviv, which is a stuffed pita place. They would have seltzer with a little bit of colored flavored syrup that was like a little bit better quality than the old sort of bug juice kind of stuff.
Can we show the couple of slides we have of the gazozim that you're writing about?
Yes, and now I am working on a book with someone named Benny Briga, who opened a tiny cafe in the Levinsky Market, which is a historic spice and dried fruit market in the southern part of Tel Aviv. And what he's done is he goes all around Israel picking fruit and collecting herbs and foraging for things, and he macerates syrups and he infuses herbs, and he makes his own kefir and kombucha, sort of tying into that old Israeli tradition of kvass and other sort of fermented drinks. And he's creating this whole new tradition of fizzy drinks that he calls gazoz. He pulls the seltzer from a spigot and he builds each glass individually with beautiful, plums that have been soaking in sugar syrup and star anise for a year, combined with a little bit of fresh myrtle, and you'll see flowers coming out of the drinks, and they both taste delicious and they feel very uniquely Tel Aviv. And I think it taps into a lot of different things that we were talking about. They feel healthier than soda, they're seasonal, they're connected to the land, and they're created by this sort of maker. They're very magical to drink, and I encourage you all to check them out when you go to Israel.
Barry, did you encounter any exotic concoctions? I know you have a whole section in the book about the fizzy seltzer-based drinks that we still celebrate, the retro ones, like the egg cream. We're going to have an egg cream reception courtesy of Gomber, Brooklyn Seltzer Boys. Sorry, I'm totally going to keep messing up your name. You have cherry lime rickeys in the book, but what else did seltzer help?
So those are the ones that are most common that most of us remember today, right? The egg cream, the cherry lime rickey. But what some of us forget is they are just the survivors of a time, 100 years ago, where every corner had their own soda jerk. And they all competed with the other 3 soda jerks on the other 3 corners. Not only to be the most performative to get people in, but to come up with those crazy concoctions and those inventions, whether it was using eggs or phosphates, different flavors, and each place had their own. And any recipe book you can find, you can go to Google Books, they're all out in the comments, and see these recipes, dozens on a page, all with different interesting creations. And you can make them yourself if you dare. And it's just fascinating to see the ones that survive. You know, why the egg cream? Why not the fizzy flip? You know, why the cherry lime Ricky and not something else? And so we've lost something, and there's something that this mixology culture that has come about in these last few years that I think is part of what has made some people excited about seltzer. There's a place in Portland, Maine, for example, that's just a seltzer bar. They originally didn't sell alcohol when they started, and it's all about coming up with interesting, creative concoctions that you can do with seltzer.
So Alex, do you have a clientele now that's more on the restaurant bar side of things?
Yes, so that was the push that when we first started Brooklyn Seltzer Boys. Just to backtrack, Gomberg Seltzer Works still exists. It is the last filling station in all of New York. We fill for the 4 remaining seltzer men Barry was talking about. Brooklyn Seltzer Boys, when I came into the business in 2013, along with my dad and my uncle, we wanted to target toward a different market. There were seltzermen who were traditionally delivering to home delivery, but we wanted to see if the restaurants and bars with this new craft cocktail push, and with restaurants putting seltzer on the table, they ask you for sparkling water or seltzer or plain water. So it was catching on. So now that's a big part of our business. We do a lot of craft cocktail bars, we do restaurants. We still do the home delivery service as well, but it's just all about fresh ingredients, especially when making that craft cocktail. You're using fresh fruits on the bar, lemons, limes, fresh ginger in the drinks. And instead of taking a soda gun, which doesn't have as much pressure, or taking a plastic bottle or even a little glass bottle of seltzer and using that, with these bottles, there's actually going to be less waste. Because when you open that plastic or glass seltzer bottle, you're only putting in about 2-3 ounces to top off the drink. The rest of the bottle, if you don't make a drink until later on, it's going to go flat. With these bottles, when you dispense it, it goes in the glass, whatever amount you want, and then the rest stays inside the bottle because of this valve inside the bottle. So it's just about fresh, and that's what it is.
How much pressure is in the bottle when you bottle it?
So in each bottle, there's 60 pounds of pressure. I'm not sure how much in a plastic bottle, but it's not even close. I mean, this bottle, because it's such a thick glass and because that valve holds it in tight, it holds that 60 pounds up until the last pour.
And Alex's dad, Kenny, will often say, if it doesn't hurt in the back of your throat when you drink it, it's not good seltzer.
That was my question. Do you deliver special order? Like I always say, I like my seltzer extra crispy, like really bubbly, to the point where it is a little painful on the tongue. But to me, that's like part of the enjoyment of it. So, is it all done to 60 pounds, or could someone say like I want 70 pounds?
They're all done to 60 pounds. We don't really adjust the machine, but what you could do is you could just tell Walter, hey, make sure you check my bottles and you just give it a little
zest
to make sure that there's a lot of pressure inside it. Because if a valve is a little bit loose, if you just push the trigger, you might hear a little bit of leak inside. So
one of the things I love about what Alex is doing is he's not just delivering people seltzer. He's delivering a way of life and a type of relationship between people who are consumers and the people who are making things for them that represent something that people are looking for and have a very hard time to find. When we have seltzer men in New York City who are dropping off how many siphons in a box? 10. That sell for how much on eBay if someone just wanted to sell them?
Just the bottle?
Just the bottles.
I've seen $50 and $70 for
leaving them in a foyer, trusting someone that they're going to give them back. 2, leave the money sometimes outside where someone on the street can come up and get them. And yet those are the relationships that are formed between the seltzer man or woman and the customers and all the people who they travel from one to the other, kind of making this web of connections throughout a neighborhood and bringing this kind of relationship, which is, I think, very unusual and hard to find these days.
So I'm gonna mention the elephant in the room, SodaStream.
Why the elephant?
I don't know. SodaStream kind of takes away that beautiful relationship because it's just you and the machine. And, the seltzer man is no longer invited when we have the SodaStream in the house. Let's talk about what it means for your business, Alex. I mean, are the SodaStream people also the Brooklyn Seltzer Boys people, or is there a kind of rift that happens there?
I mean, I don't want to put it down, but some people, I always ask, a customer, how'd you find out about us? What'd you do? Some people type in alternative to SodaStream. Some people, alternative to plastic bottles, just to get away from that, type of product. They want something glass, something more eco-friendly, something that's, not even recycled, reused, just over and over and over. We don't even break the bottles down. We keep refilling in these bottles. But it's just a different product. And that's because, again, these bottles hold such a extreme pressure. It's also triple filtered New York City tap water and mixed with CO2. Whatever water you get out of your sink is the water that's going to be in your SodaStream. So it could be different depending on where you are.
Speaking from my own experience as a passionate seltzer consumer, I have layers of backup. So my Walter seltzer was the A1,
Okay.
and then the SodaStream was the second tier, and then I would have bottles of vintage as the double backup if I ran out of the other two. So definitely this was number one. But in Israel, SodaStream is very popular. It's an Israeli company actually, and so that's how many people get there.
The president from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
The Brooklyn boy.
Yeah.
I mean, the beauty of SodaStream, of course, is you get to make it yourself. Alice gets to make it every day. But for us, we have to use a SodaStream.
I was curious, do you guys think seltzer tastes different than regular water? Yeah.
Yeah.
I do. I feel like it has its own flavor. Yeah, it's a little bit sour, a little bit salty.
Well, there's no salt in our seltzer.
There's no salt.
There's bubbles. But the difference between seltzer and water is just that it has there's a bite to it. There's no taste really, but there's that bite that Barry was mentioning, and there should be that tingly sensation. You can talk more about the effects on your tongue and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's an experience. Drinking seltzer is an experience, and you can drink something else with carbonation, maybe like soda or something else. But people who go from drinking sugary soda to water, they feel like they're missing something. And those are often the people who are then making seltzer popular now. Because they miss something from the soda, they find it's the carbonation. But it's not because they want the taste of the carbonation. It's that experience, and for me, it's that bite. It just isn't the same thing for me to have a meal and not get that bite along with it. Or coming in from a hot day, it's not because the seltzer's cold. It's that experience in the mouth that just feels so refreshing.
I'd love to talk to you a little more about why seltzer is funny. Can you please play the Simpsons clip?
So I remember you guys came in with this idea and you wanted to do a jazz singer parody where Krusty had been a clown against the wishes of his rabbi father.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I came in.
Was this one of these writers' retreats? Wasn't
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Jake, I remember Jay told me before, I think we should do a Krusty show, jazz singer style, which I thought was, of course, a great idea.
My father tried to extinguish the comedy bug, but it was no use.
What are you doing in that bathroom?
Go away!
Open the door! This instant! Hey, you bird!
Close the door! Then came my favorite, the rooted conference in the Catskills, and I was the entertainer. The Lord works in mysterious ways.
Do you know that my son Herschel was first in his yeshiva class? As a matter of fact, he was voted the most likely to hear God.
Oh, go on, Hyman. You're exaggerating again. You're so proud of your son.
A rabbi would never exaggerate. A rabbi composes. He creates thoughts. He tells stories that may never have happened, but he does not exaggerate.
My father would have never suspected a thing, were it not for one rowdy rabbi. Hey, funny man!
Herschel! Why face me? You have brought shame on our family. Oh, if you were a musician or a jazz singer, I can forgive one. But this, I never want to see you again. You clown.
I haven't seen my father since.
That is so sad. Krusty, do you think about your father a lot?
All the time. Except when I'm at the track, then it's all business.
I don't remember a time when seltzer wasn't associated with clowns. Can you please shed some light onto how this bizarre marriage occurred?
Yes, there's no coincidence that Krusty's a clown, and he's the one who's spraying the seltzer. The way seltzer is being used, not so much here, although actually in that last shot, It's this type of aggressive love. We saw it more in the Three Stooges, right? They're these brothers who love each other but also hate each other, and they fight with each other. That's a comedic trope that goes back to the early days of vaudeville and before that. And the way that Seltzer is used as an expression of that love, this aggressive love, is something that's in many ways defined not just how Seltzer's used in comedy, but Jewish comedy for the last 100 years. And that's part of why I think we've seen it so often. We had Jews in New York City as actors and comedians in Yiddish Broadway, and with the Three Stooges starting in vaudeville, then moving over into Hollywood and bringing those comedic values, those comedic traditions, and having physical props, often with food, because food can be funny, but it's used inappropriately if you're looking for some kind of juvenile humor, which some people think the Three Stooges is, and having water, a seltzer being sprayed was part of the funny things about food. And then you have the tradition of moving from Broadway to Catskills and television, and in that context, clowns, Clarabelle the Clown, on Mary Tyler Moore, we had, I just blanked on the name.
Chuckles.
Chuckles, thank you. Repeat after, finish this for me. A little song, a little dance.
A little seltzer in your pants.
Seltzer down your pants, thank you. We saw one generation of clowns after another continuing this tradition as vaudeville went away, as the style of humor matured, but the Seltzer siphon continued as a means of expressing this kind of aggressive love in a humorous context.
I think it's also funny because there's an element of surprise and the unknown. Like, you don't know what's going to happen when you open a bottle of seltzer. So, you know, how many of us have come home from the store, exactly, with a bottle of, plastic bottle of seltzer, and you just sort of look at it and wonder, like, what's going to happen when you open it? Or even these, you know, the getting it right, as we all witnessed, just there's just something unknown always, and it's different every single time.
Well, I'd argue, in addition, when someone holds this up and it's a comedy, it's like, you know, the Chekhov's gun. You're waiting for it to go off. You're waiting for it to get sprayed. So it's this wonderful opportunity to create this comedic tension that then gets released like that when it's not in a glass but someone's face.
And burping's kind of funny too.
Right.
We haven't talked about burping yet. What happens when you drink your seltzer too fast?
That's right. Body functions are always very funny.
Lowest form of comedy, but it's funny. Alex?
I was just going to mention, we recently started to do tours at our Gomberg Seltzer Works, which is where Brooklyn Seltzer gets their bottles. And my favorite part of the tour is actually when people who are not really familiar with these bottles, they discover when I spray the bottle for the first time that they would, like, it's their first like reaction. So I always get a kick out of it. I look at everybody when I'm spraying the bottle. So it's pretty. That's like my favorite part, to see people's reaction.
And I have to ask each and every one of you, because I'm sure you have your own ideas, but I can't help but feel there is this very strong connection between Jewishness and seltzer. However, I can't pinpoint it to the Torah, so...
Well, we've tried.
But to me, the link is very palpable. It's called Jewish champagne, as you all know affectionately. But I do wonder if each of you has a hunch or a couple of theories, or a half-baked theory. Feel free to jump in.
Me first. I mean, it's just, if you look at the name on every single bottle, you'll see Feifowitz and Leibowitz, and every single bottle has a different Jewish name on it. So Seltzermen were Jewish, I mean, for the most part. You know, we also do bar and bat mitzvahs, and a lot of times we'll get a line of people, and a lot of people at the front of the line, they just want to talk about their Seltzermen, that they used to have. So we're like, move over. We need to serve some egg creams here. So hopefully we don't get that later. We need to pump out 500 egg creams. But it's Jewish. I mean, it's in our blood.
I would guess that, you know, Jews typically didn't drink alcohol like in a social situation, like during the day, like if people came to visit. But there's something special about drinking seltzer. Like it's a little bit fancier and a little more like, you know, like you're treating someone to something that's more expensive than water and sort of special on some level. And also, so I think that there maybe that might have had something to do with why it was so popular in in the Jewish world, I'm guessing. What do you think?
I'm going to be controversial.
Okay.
I'm going to make the case that there's nothing inherently Jewish about seltzer. There is undoubtedly a very strong connection between Jews and seltzer, absolutely. And there's a chapter in my book called How Seltzer Got Religion. And what it's about is this very thing. And all the reasons you guys talked about, I explore them all. You need it for digestion, right? Jews and alcohol and that relationship, all the things you mentioned, Alex. And there's all good arguments for all of them, but I wasn't satisfied with any of them. The question I was asking was, is seltzer Jewish? And what I realized, it took a few years, is that that was the wrong question. The question wasn't, why did Jews drink seltzer? It's, why did everyone else stop? And to understand that, you have to understand both the history of Jewish assimilation in America, and you also have to understand about 200 years of Americans' preferences for what we choose to drink. 200 years ago, we idolized what was European. Mineral water was what was seen as pure and good. If minerals were in water, it meant it was healthy. Unmineralized water was local water that was probably polluted, so minerals was pure and clean. For whatever reason, by the end of the 19th century, Poland water, which many of us know from their springs, which was unmineralized water, was seen as the ideal. And we switched. And as we switched, we moved over to water without minerals, that we then carbonated and added syrup to. But Jews were among a number of groups that came over from Europe after the turn of the century and brought their food values and culinary taste with them. And as Jews know, we move from location to location and maintain our values over time. Sometimes in oppressive environments, sometimes in welcoming environments, but we have an ability to hold on to our traditions, and food is one of them. So as Jews assimilated, just as all other groups came to America, they just took a little bit longer to start drinking Coca-Cola and identifying with that. There's a book called Up From Seltzer. Some of you might know it's a comedy book from the early 70s. It's not about seltzer. It's about the 4 generations of Jews at that time in America. Seltzer was seen as the thing that Jews came up from, as framed in that book. It was what was being left behind. So there was like this idea of this kind of traditional shtetl folks that just came over, were very unhappy with their seltzer. And then the contemporary Jews looked like a bunch of hippies, and they were holding a party. Right? And that was this trajectory. So there was this idea that we were going to leave that behind as we became American. And so we have this strong nostalgia, as you referenced earlier, for seltzer. I think what we're really nostalgic for is that part of what it meant to be Jewish when we first came here as immigrants, and our contemporary struggles with what it means to be Jewish Americans today, both bringing our traditions into the present and redeveloping them for the future.
It's incredible. It reminds me of the passage in your book when and then he scrolls still, I'm sure. The passage when you're describing these 2 seltzer upstarts in Pittsburgh who decided to buy this factory. And the factory was very lovingly passed from one owner to the next, and from the owner before those owners to the next, because they knew that they were holding something that was priceless. It wasn't just a factory, but it was a way of life that, as you know, Alex, is very rare these days. It's the seltzer way of life. So the accounts that the Pittsburgh Seltzer Works had in play were mostly in Squirrel Hill, which we all know is the majority Jewish neighborhood with real historical significance in Jewish American life. So does that play into your theory, would you say, that most of the accounts in this rickety old Seltzer Works were in Squirrel Hill?
So the current owners of Pittsburgh Seltzer Works, they took it over about 10 years ago. Their ownership traveled from this period when it was mainly in traditional neighborhoods where people drank it, older Jews, Italians, and then suddenly they started having more diversified clientele all around the city, not just in people's homes, but also people wanting it in restaurants and bars. And nowadays you can find seltzer in all sorts of places. You can go to, at least a few years ago, you can go to 11 Madison Park, a really, upscale restaurant in the city, and you could have a special kind of egg cream made that wouldn't look like any egg cream you'd have anywhere else, but was their own take on it. And it's not a surprise now to find it at a restaurant where they say, do you want still water or do you want bubbly? And it's not necessarily something you're buying, it's just part of what they serve. And we see it more and more all around as it moves out from just the locations where people held it on as a lifestyle to people knowing it's one of the many options that they have to drink.
So we're going to segue pretty soon into the Q&A portion of the evening. Just want to give everyone a heads up that there will be a little bit of audience participation in addition to the Q&A. There will be a blind taste test of some seltzer.
And we're going to need some volunteers.
And before we head into that, I just want to talk to the three of you about how seltzer has jumped the shark a little bit. For instance, is there a flavor, is it called unicorn tears, or like unicorn laughter?
Unicorn kisses.
Unicorn kisses. I didn't know this, but I'm...
Not to be confused with Yeti Mischief.
Jedi Mischief?
Yeti Mischief.
Yeti.
Same company.
Okay, I'm like not cool. I don't know what these things mean. I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is the home of Polar Seltzer. And I guess Polar Seltzer is just really going to town with these inscrutable flavors.
Yeah, a few years ago, they came up with a brilliant idea. Why put the actual name of the flavor on the can? Let's come up with something creative and fun and let our fans, in their case, the people who drink their seltzer, decide what it actually was. And they came up with this thing in a limited run. They did jokes sometimes on April Fool's Day, but this year it wasn't a joke. For a very limited period of time, you could buy unicorn kisses. So everyone west of Boston, around Boston, was scrambling, sending messages on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, where could you find it? We're the last ones. And then trying to describe what it was online. And it became so successful, they did a line of them with the Yeti Mischief and a few, Dragon Tears, maybe something Dragon. And then eventually made them regular now, so you can go to a store and you can buy your LaCroix Pamplemousse, you can get your plain vintage seltzer, or you could buy your unicorn kisses.
Very Game of Thrones, like dragon flavored seltzer. Alex, have you seen any weird stuff in your day as a burgeoning seltzer man?
I drink, we have plain seltzer. I don't know anything about unicorn kisses. No, we don't believe in putting anything into our bottles. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We do it the same way. We've been doing it for many, many years. All of the flavoring is put into the glass and topped off with our seltzer, just to make whatever concoction you want to make.
One thing I have noticed recently in Israel is that they used to call bottled flavored cola. So soda is seltzer. It's a little confusing for us Americans, but soda is seltzer in Hebrew. And now all of the sort of flavored sodas like strawberry are called gazoz b'ta'am tut. Like they're trying to like re-healthify the soda, even though it has kind of the same amount of sugar that it had a year ago with a different name. But it used to maybe be called cola b'ta'am strawberry, and now it's called gazoz because gazoz is now trendy and sort of like what we're talking about with sort of harkening back to something more vintage and also a little more local and healthy. So that's, I think it's a little bit of a marketing ploy that I see through that kind of offends me, but I see how they're trying to like gather us all into the idea that like a fruit flavored soda is more of like a healthy sparkler than a soda itself. So that's my observation.
Well, in the Instagram age, it's amazing that seltzer is so popular because it doesn't look like anything.
Right. Well, in many ways, the popularity of seltzer has been fueled by Instagram users, by people wanting to show seltzer in different contexts, who are, like I said, running to the store to get that special, unusual flavor that just came out, and then sharing it and having people follow it. People have made businesses selling things associated with their favorite brand of seltzer by putting it out on Instagram and having the companies resend it out. And it's that relationship that social media allows for the companies to have that direct one-on-one connection with the consumers and letting them define their brand and then take what they do and putting it back out that has driven interest in many of the more contemporary popular seltzer brands.
Has anyone in the audience tried a unicorn flavored seltzer? Oh, really?
Well,
what does it taste like?
Full disclosure, I'm Barry's sister, so.
My sister.
Yeah, we had a whole taste test one night when the new flavors came out at Shabbat, and we had so much fun. My niece and nephew, Barry's kids, my father, my stepmother, my sister-in-law, and we all had little cups, and we tasted them all.
She's saying that at Shabbat one time when the new flavors came out, my kids and my dad and she came over and we had little taste test, and in fact, it's very similar to what we're going to do in just a few minutes.
Yeah, it's actually a perfect segue. Thank you, Barry's sister.
That wasn't planned.
We're going to have a Q&A, and concurrently, there's going to be a little bit of a blind tasting on stage with 3 lucky members of the audience, which Barry will conduct because clearly he's old hat at this. So before we go into Q&A, do we have 3 intrepid palates out there?
Yeah, is it okay if I? All right. So we have a little bit of a competition because we're kind of separated into 3. So we have the middle over here, we have the right over here, and the left over here. I see 2 hands in the back. You guys are gonna have to pick amongst yourselves. Can one of you please come up? So your side's gonna be represented by one of those lovely ladies in the back. I'm gonna do the left side next. What do we have over here?
I think a striped scarf with your hand up.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pick that gentleman in the front. Come on up. And in the middle, the lady in white. Lady in white, come on up. We're going to take Q&As in a moment, but not yet. So as they come up to the stage.
Just a second. Yeah. We'll get to you. It's a very important question. And we'll have a mic for you too.
Great. 1, 2. Hi. Are you with her? Oh, did I?
I totally messed up.
Sorry.
Didn't I? Can we get some more glasses? We can just get like a, yeah, or
do we have enough?
If you don't want to share glasses, we can get some more glasses.
And we'll also need one more pen and a sheet. So let's find out who we have with us up here. What's your name? And where are you coming from tonight?
New York.
Excellent. What's your name?
My name is Joyce Mollett, Flushing, Queens.
Flushing, wonderful.
Renee Crevine, he's 67.
And what's your name?
Logan Hennis.
And where are you coming from tonight?
New York.
Excellent. All right, so what we have here on the table are numbered glasses. Our illustrious volunteers, can a round of applause, please, first for coming up. Thank you. They don't know what's in the glasses, but there's numbers, 1 through 5. So please grab a pen, and I'm actually going to give a sheet over here. We'll get you an extra pen in a moment. And what we're going to... Oh, she has a pen. It's awesome. I think we'll get you one. Thank you very much. Thank you. So what we're going to ask them to do is write on your sheet 1 through 5, have a taste of each of the 5 here, and write down first a description of what you think it tastes like, and if you have a guess of what you think it actually is. These are flavored seltzers bought in the store in New York City today. We're going to do some Q&A, and then we're going to come back and find out if they can guess which one. So, we have 4 representatives here. You're from what section, sir? You represent this section, and where are you from, Logan?
Over there.
Over on the right, and you're in the middle, and you represent us on the stage. You're on your team stage. All right, thank you. So we're going to come back to you in a few minutes. You guys understand the task? You guys understand how to represent you and what you need them to do? All right, we'll see how many flavors they can guess. So you're going to take...
Okay, so once that's all sorted out, they're going to work really, really hard. And we're going to take questions from the audience. So I think we can take our first question. There's a mic coming around.
Hi. Hi. I remember a book, I think it was written by Harry Golden. It was called For 2 Cents Plain. So I'm wondering if even back in the early years there was flavor that, and plain was different.
That's right, there was flavor put in. 2 Cents Plain, the name of Harry Golden's book that came out in the 50s. It was a New York Times bestseller at the time and helped establish and introduce this phrase to many non-New Yorkers. 2 Cents Plain was a story of going in to the soda jerk and saying, I want a 2 cents plain. But then while they're putting the seltzer and saying, can you put a little syrup in? If you did that at the beginning, that would have been 3 cents. So that was the story of not just seltzer on the Lower East Side, but this relationship between the soda jerks and the drinkers.
Okay, can this gentleman with the egg cream question?
Yes, the egg cream. Where did that come from? Because there's no egg.
The question is, where did the egg cream come from? So egg cream, which has neither egg nor cream, is claimed by many people. Again, I have an entire chapter on the history of the egg cream, with many people claiming that it is theirs. Long story short, remember I mentioned earlier that there used to be all this different competition from different soda jerks that come up with different flavors? Well, many of those drinks at the time did have eggs and did have cream. So I think the most compelling argument is that there were people who couldn't afford eggs and couldn't afford creams. So having a drink that looked like that and felt like that a little bit, felt somewhat indulgent and special. And that's where most likely I think the egg cream came from. Why that's the one that stuck around and the only one that's left today from the hundreds that it competed against, that we don't know.
Hashtag Jews. Fox's You Bet is the original egg cream syrup, and Alex put together a really amazing reception downstairs with as many egg creams as you possibly could pour down your gullet, so I hope you'll stay for that. Next question, yes?
I'm really enjoying this talk. It's really interesting. I'm wondering why new bottles can't be manufactured. I noticed that these are hand-blown, some of them. Is it not cost-effective to manufacture bottles?
Anything can be made, but yes, it's not exactly cost-effective. The bottles were hand-blown, so which is a lost art, and that's, if you tell me who does it, I'm happy to take their number. But they don't make these bottles anymore. They stopped making them a long time ago, and we have many, many bottles in our warehouse that we still need to restore. So as many customers keep calling us, we're just keep fixing the old bottles that we have. There hopefully will be a point where we, use up all of our bottles, and before that time, I'm sure we're gonna have to figure something out.
But didn't the Seltzer sisters in San Francisco, they're making like a fatter, like they created some kind of a different bottle. It has like a netting on the outside almost?
It's kind of a shortcut.
There's
just in my opinion, the plastic bottle that you're referring to.
Can you describe that?
It basically looks like this. It's a plastic bottle that looks like this, and then it has a plastic top. It has the same function. It functions the same way, but
plastic.
It's plastic. Some people say that they could taste that plasticky taste. That's up for debate, but it's just not the same nostalgic look and appeal to it.
Is there a difference in the way it holds pressure because it's plastic?
No, it's filled by the same exact machine, the same exact machinery, so it does hold the same pressure. In fact, those bottles hold more seltzer. They're a bigger bottle, I think. Right, I think it holds a little more than a liter. These are 26.
I think it's also useful to put this in the international context. America's had its interest in seltzer go up and down, but other countries like Argentina and Hungary, it just stayed constant. And they have their own traditions and their own way of doing things. So many of the bottles we'll see today are the Argentinian ones, like the plastic bottles that Alex was talking about to replace the metal tins. And Hungary modernized a few years ago, and they have their own processes. And the seltzer man in Florida wanted to be the first American to bring that technique over and see if it could be franchised out, because it can spread in ways that these 100-year-old machines that fill these can't.
We're going to take another question here and then pivot to these folks, and then maybe take a few more questions. So thanks for the juggling and bearing with us.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. So I just wanted to turn the discussion from history and tradition into objective reality, which is what is the exact process by which CO2 is dissolved in water, and why 60 psi pounds per square inch was selected. Was it an arbitrary number, or is there any rationale behind that? And if I could buy a bottle, either on eBay or somewhere, should I be able to carbonate at home, or should I use a service like yours to do that?
Let's start with the second one first. Should he buy his own bottle on eBay and create a contraption that is somewhat like a bomb and try and fill it up at home, or should he bring it to Alex's? Alex?
I mean, I would say come to me. Dad, do you want to take this question? This is way over my head.
Well, the mic is getting
to
Kenny. The first part was the science question. And I think for this audience, what we can say in general is the colder the water, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the colder the water, the more that water is going to be able to get what the old language was impregnated with CO2 to hold it in, and then the pressure holds it in. So the colder the water, with the pressure in place, the sharper it's going to be. That's why the pressure is so important. The more pressure, the more colder, the sharper that seltzer is going to be. Anything else you want to add about that?
I'm going to defer.
Kenny?
Yes, it's true. The colder the water, it facilitates the carbonation better. But as you reach a certain point, if the water gets too cold, the opposite happens. So the optimal temperature we found is somewhere between 39 and 43 degrees. We bottle at 42 degrees, and the reason there's 60 pounds in the bottle, the carbonator actually puts out 100 pounds of pressure. The bottles are subjected to 100 pounds of pressure when they're filled. There is a device on top of the machine that regulates the back pressure. It's too much to get technical to explain all of this, but it's maintained at 60 pounds, and that seems to be what that seems to give us the best seltzer.
Gabriella, should we come to our volunteers here? And
Yeah,
find
let's
out
see
what
how
they
you
said?
guys did. Maybe just tell us what we're tasting, and then let's see how you guys did with identifying these flavors. Thank you, Ken.
So we have four volunteers, one representing stage left, one representing stage right, one in the middle, and one on the stage. So let's hear from representative stage left. The number one. Can you hold it up, please, so everyone can see it in the audience? All right. So how would you describe the flavor of this one?
Sort of a mango bittersweet.
Sort of a mango bittersweet. And Logan, how would you describe that one?
It was very tangy, and it kind of like was sour. So I was like, is it ginger or I don't know. It wasn't my favorite.
Representing the stage?
Mango.
Mango.
I wasn't sure if it was a mango or a papaya flavor on it. It was like a smooth taste.
The reveal. Number one. This is Ari. Thank you, Ari. It turns out it is Spindrift's. Can you read what it is up there?
Mango. Orange mango.
Orange mango. Orange mango. So we heard about a big bunch of mangoes. Did anyone say orange mango? All right, sorry, no one's going to get the points on this one. All right, number two. We'll start down here as well. Can you hold up number two?
It's a tough cookie.
This is a clear one. How would you describe number two?
Sort of a lime.
A lime. Okay. Logan?
Lime.
Lime.
Lemon lime.
Lemon lime.
It was a very mild lemon lime. It was almost like plain seltzer that had like a little tang to it. It was almost plain.
Just a little hint of lemon lime. Oh, there it is. Number two.
Pamplemousse?
It is not lemon lime, it is pamplemousse, which otherwise is known as grapefruit. Grapefruit.
Francais.
The crowd's like, unbelievable, really? Steve. All right, last three.
I thought this was a strawberry berry type of taste and sort of sweet.
A sweet strawberry berry. Okay, Logan, or should we double checking?
Well, I said it was grapefruit, but clearly it's not grapefruit. And so I also said like berry or raspberry.
Okay.
Strawberry.
Strawberry.
I tasted peachy.
A peach. Peach, strawberry, or raspberry. The answer is.
No.
This is number 5.
Sorry, guys. Oh, is that wrong? Oh, shoot.
Apple bubbly.
Oh.
Apple.
Apple.
No, it's just really.
Things are getting chaotic.
So all of the question was it artificial flavoring? Some are designed to taste artificial, actually, I would say, but they're all natural flavorings. All right, we're moving on to number 4. Will any team get a point? We're going to find out now. Number 4.
Number 4, I thought it was a peach.
A peach?
Strawberry lemonade.
Peach? No.
I put raspberry down, but after tasting it, I said, could be peach.
Raspberry or peach? Well, where do you go now?
I'll go with peach.
Go with peach, okay.
I'm going to say it had like a chocolatey flavor.
That's crazy.
Number 4 is, you guys will have to decide what to do with this one. Unicorn kisses.
It's a rigged system.
That actually makes sense though, because like it tastes like strawberry-ish, like very bright. So unicorn kind of like bright.
The way you expect a unicorn to taste. Well, thank you. All right, and with the 5th glass, the last one.
I could not identify this, but I found it was unpleasant.
Unpleasant. Fair enough. Logan?
I couldn't tell which one it was because there was barely any flavor, so it was like it wasn't going to be plain, so orange.
Orange?
Oh, figured it wasn't plain.
Chocolate.
And it did not smell like it tasted, like when I first had like a strong smell, and it was some kind of berry, in my opinion.
Some kind of berry. The reveal for the last one is not something I can read without my glasses.
Strawberry.
Strawberry. Did someone say strawberry?
No.
You said berry. I think
Close
what we
enough.
should do is say we all win and we owe them all a round of thanks. We're going to 5 different flavor Seltzer. Thank you all so much.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions before the ice cream reception. There's so many questions.
Now I'm going to give them Alex's.
Okay.
They'll cleanse the palate.
Thank
the
you
real
to
stuff.
our tasters. Yes. Could you tell us the origin of sparkling juice?
This is really good. Like really, really good.
Alice's.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Can you please tell us the origin of sparkling grape juice?
I would say your guess is as good as mine.
This would be the quality bullshit portion of the. Any of us knows.
Manischewitz marketing department. It's like, I remember when it kind of popped on the scene.
It's wine for kids.
It's just, yeah. Like kosher
margaritas. Yeah, we don't quite know. Next question, yes?
Yeah, I've been holding this question for 55 years. And I'm not going to sleep until I get a clear, direct answer. Now I have the expert panel. Is there a difference between seltzer and club soda?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Alex, did you want to take this one?
Most club soda is going to have sodium in it.
Yes.
But not all. Most seltzer won't have any, but not all. Club soda, seltzer, tonic, and ginger ale. Those are the 4 mixers. At some point, we started assuming that one should have one with salt and one without. Why? I don't know. But you shouldn't assume it's one or the other. You should be an informed consumer. You should always look and see what you're drinking.
If you look on the label, most of the club sodas have like 35 milligrams of sodium per serving. And actually, I know we're very anti-salt, but actually, like if you're thinking in culinary terms, sometimes salt can really help sort of create structure in a beverage or in a recipe. Like think about adding a pinch of salt to a cake batter really brings out the vanilla flavor and even the sweetness. So if you're making drinks that have other components, sometimes using a club soda can actually improve the drink. So it's not always a bad thing.
But at the end of the day, there's no formal definitions for any
Right,
of this.
that's
It's
true.
marketing and preferences and regionalities and like that.
But when looking at real seltzer, which is this seltzer, this has no salt. So seltzer, no salt, club soda, salt. End of conversation.
Yes, question in the back.
Okay, so I am the grandchild of a seltzer man. My grandfather, Samuel Cranwine, delivered seltzer, schlepped the cases and the wooden cases on his shoulder, up the tenement steps, and I know what the crates look like. He had very strong arms, so I have a question. That's good. Do you still have those wooden crates, or have you moved into plastic, heaven forbid?
No. Again, we did not reinvent the wheel. Thank you to Kenny the Carpenter. We remake the old wood boxes to the exact model that the old boxes were. So those rickety boxes that were falling apart, they've since been replaced. We don't put our label on the bottle, we just put our brand on the box. And when you come and see the egg creams, you'll see the bottles, the original bottles in the newer wood boxes.
Can you say what kind of wood it is?
The wood it is? It's pine. It's just pine wood. And we actually make our boxes in our warehouse, and if anybody would like to see the process, we actually do give tours, so we do it.
Do we have time for any
It's in
more
Canarsie.
questions?
Oh, the seltzer shop?
I think you guys you're all like an amazingly engaged audience, but I think
You can talk to us
you can
one-on-one
talk to us
afterwards.
downstairs. It's
Sign
at
downstairs,
reception,
everything
buy a
downstairs.
book, and thank you so